Why is it that the Union won the Battle of Gettysburg? Whenever we hear about the Battle of Gettysburg, the conversation always seems to be about the problems that the South had. Jeb Stuart was absent with his cavalry. They'd lost Stonewall Jackson. He was very difficult to replace. And then there was all this bickering between Generals Lee and Longstreet. And the context is the two previous battles, Fredericksburg the previous December and then Chancellorsville in May, just 2 months earlier, were both big Southern victories. And the assumption was going forward that victory was just automatic for the Army of Northern Virginia. And then the Battle of Gettysburg, they lost. So how did that happen? And when I look at the Battle of Gettysburg, it seems to me that there was no way the South was going to win that battle. And there were 6 reasons. Starting at the bottom, number 6, the Union Army was fighting on its home ground. Number 5, the Union commanders were more unified than the Southern commanders. Number 4, the Union had a superiority in reconnaissance and intelligence. Number 3, the Union had a big superiority in artillery. Number 2, the Union Army outnumbered the Southern Army. And number 1, the Union Army was fighting dug in on high ground. Union advantage number 6. The Army was fighting on its home ground, and this has 3 components. A is local knowledge and support, B is morale, and C is logistics. Take a look at this map. Gettysburg's here, the Potomac is here, and Virginia is down here. Pennsylvania is a Union state, Virginia is a Southern state, Maryland is a border state. And Lee's raid into Pennsylvania, and I no longer call it an invasion, I think raid is a better word. Lee's raid had put him in a position where he could threaten Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and the Pennsylvania state capital at Harrisburg up here, which is good, but being in Pennsylvania also gave the Union advantages. Advantage A is local knowledge and support. And local knowledge is important. Local knowledge gave the Confederates the information on the back road, which allowed Jackson to strike the Union flank at Chancellorsville. And once Lee's army crossed into Pennsylvania, they lost local knowledge, and the residents weren't so supportive. And examples of Gettysburg residents supporting the Union include the elderly John Burns, who actually turned out to fight and was wounded 3 times. The Gettysburg residents, David Kendallhart and David McConaughey, provided intelligence on troop movements. And then the Union general, Schimmelpfennig, Brigadier General Schimmelpfennig, was caught behind the lines during the fighting on the first day and had to hide in town and was sheltered until the Confederates evacuated Gettysburg on the evening of the 3rd day, was sheltered by the Gettysburg family, the Garlock family. B, morale. Pennsylvania troops played a prominent role in the battle. It was Pennsylvania regiments that defended the angle against Pickett's charge. There is no metric for this, but I have to believe the Union Army fought harder knowing they're defending their home ground. C, logistics. Logistics is defined as the movement of people and supplies. The Confederate Army was fighting a long way from home. They'd never been this far north before. They were trying to live off the land, and as the writers describe it, they were doing pretty well as far as food and forage and whatever they could pillage from local farms. But as far as manufactured items, not so much. Well, what kind of manufactured items did they need? Well, probably things like guns, ammunition, shoes for troops, and horseshoes. The Confederate Army famously ran out of ammunition during Pickett's charge on the 3rd day. The Union Army, on the other hand, was well supplied with ammunition and other supplies. And this map shows you the problem. At the top is the battlefield at Gettysburg. Both armies depended on railroads to deliver supplies in bulk. Where the rail lines ended, they then had to shift supplies onto horse-drawn wagons to continue forward to wherever the army was. The point the rail line ended was called a railhead. The Union Army railhead was here at Westminster, 21 miles from Gettysburg, probably one day's travel for horse-drawn wagons. And look how close Baltimore is. Baltimore was a major manufacturing center. And where is the Confederate manufacturing center? Maybe Birmingham, Alabama. Maybe Richmond. Did they have a manufacturing center? Union Brigadier General Haupt was working feverishly to open the rail line through to Gettysburg along here, but it would be a couple more days. So Westminster was the Union railhead. And the relative advantage to the Union here is huge. The Confederate railheads were at Stanton and Culpeper here in Virginia. Stanton's 152 miles away. Culpeper is 119 miles. My guess is they were about 2 weeks distant when traveling with a horse-drawn wagon. And then they also had to cross the Potomac River. Maybe there's a bridge available. Maybe not. See my video about General Lee's retreat from Gettysburg. If there's no bridge, the wagons have to ford the river. The Union Army had dramatically easier access to supplies and ammunition and more of both. And if you don't have supplies and ammunition, you can't fight. Big advantage to the Union. Union advantage number 5. The Union commanders showed more unity of purpose and cooperation than the Confederate counterparts. That's a big part of the current narrative about Gettysburg. Problems between Lee and his corps commanders and between the corps commanders themselves. And consider the meetings that General Lee had with his corps commanders on the night of July 1. Lee started with General Longstreet. Lee wanted to attack, but Longstreet wanted to move the army to the south to get between the Union Army and Washington, D.C. And Edwin Coddington, in his book, The Gettysburg Campaign, described, and I'll read it, Longstreet's rather truculent attitude and obvious unwillingness to attack. And Coddington concluded, Longstreet's violent objections to his proposals must have come as a shocking surprise, unquote. Lee then rode northeast to the other side of town to meet with General Ewell. Lee suggested that Ewell move his corps to the right to get closer to the other corps. And Ewell's division commanders were also present at the meeting, and they objected. And Coddington commented, and I'll read it, instead of offering their commanding officer hearty cooperation and an eagerness to respond positively to his suggestions, they gave him objections and reasons why they should not do certain things. Like bulky horses, they would go neither forward nor backward, unquote. And then also consider the problems between Lee and Longstreet on the second and third days. And I've described these somewhat in my videos on day 2 and day 3. And that's a big part of the current description about the Battle of Gettysburg. Discord and disagreement among the Confederate commanders. Consider the Union side. My sense is the Union commanders were much more cooperative. And I'll offer up the negotiations on the afternoon of July 2 as an example. These are the negotiations between General Meade, the Army of the Potomac commander, and General Slocum, commanding 12th Corps. The Union left was in danger, and Meade was scrambling to find reinforcements. And Meade considered that the 12th Corps' position on Culp's Hill was relatively secure. And according to Harry Fans in his book, Gettysburg, Culp's Hill, and Cemetery Hill, General Meade asked General Slocum to move the entire 12th Corps off of Culp's Hill to the left to secure his left flank. And according to Fans, Slocum began by moving one division, and then Slocum sent one of his staffers, Lieutenant Colonel Rogers, back to General Meade to point out that it was dangerous to leave Culp's Hill undefended and to request that he keep the remaining division on the hill. And Fans wrote, In a while, Rogers returned from his talk with Meade with the message that Meade believed that the left was the point of real danger, which it then was, but that if Slocum deemed it absolutely essential, he could retain not a division on the right, but a brigade. So General Meade asked General Slocum to move his entire corps to the left. And Slocum objects that he thinks it's too dangerous, and they negotiate, and Meade offers to let him keep a brigade on the hill. That one brigade was Greene's brigade, and Greene's brigade successfully defended Culp's Hill, and Meade successfully defended the Union left. So the Union commanders disagree, compromise, and succeed. The Confederate commanders disagree, never seem to pull together, and fail. Union advantage number 4. The Union reconnaissance and intelligence services outperformed the Confederates. From the moment he took command on June 28, General Meade knew the location of each of General Lee's major units. For example, there's a famous message from Brigadier General Buford, who was camped with his cavalry division at Gettysburg the night before the battle. And in this message, Buford calls out the location of each of Lee's 3 infantry corps. And I'll read the message. A.P. Hill's corps is massed just back of Cashtown, about 9 miles from this place. Ewell's corps is crossing the mountains from Carlisle, Rhodes's division being at Petersburg in advance. Longstreet, from all I can learn, is still behind Hill, unquote. That's 100% accurate. At no point during the campaign, from Brandy Station to crossing the Potomac during the retreat, did the Union intelligence services lose track of Lee's army. They may not have known Lee's plans, but they always knew where the Army of Northern Virginia was located. On the other hand, Lee was famously surprised on June 28 via the spy Harrison to learn that the Union Army was across the Potomac and dangerously close, and Lee had to scramble to concentrate his army. And then on July 1, A.P. Hill's corps blundered into the fight west of town. They thought they were facing militia, and Eric Wittenberg, in his book, The Devil's to Pay, says that A.P. Hill believed the night before the battle that Buford's cavalry division was still in Virginia. And I refer to the famous conversation the night before the battle between the Corps commander, Lieutenant General A.P. Hill, the division commander, Major General Harry Heath, and the brigade commander, Brigadier General James Pettigrew, where A.P. Hill is quoted as saying, "I still cannot believe that any portion of the Army of the Potomac is up," unquote. Union advantage number 3. The Union had better artillery. The advantage was in number of artillery pieces, quality and quantity of ammunition, and in management. First, the Union had lots more artillery pieces. If you use the numbers published in Philip Lano's book, Gettysburg Campaign Atlas, it was 366 versus 240, which is a 52% advantage for the Union. Second, the Union had more and better ammunition. Famously, the Confederates ran out of ammunition during Pickett's charge on the 3rd day. The rebel artillery were unable to support Pickett's division or Wilcox's and Lang's brigades when they charged. On the other hand, the Yankees had a 60-wagon supply, reserve supply of ammunition waiting nearby. The Union railhead was at Westminster, Maryland, which is 21 miles away. The Confederate railhead was at Stanton, Virginia, which is 152 miles. If you assume a wagon train can travel 20 miles per day, that means that the Confederate stockpile was more than a week away by wagon, where the Union warehouse was only 1 day away. Third, and finally, there was an issue with management. Union artillery in general was centrally managed. Brigadier General Henry Hunt was the Army of the Potomac artillery chief and had strong central control. Brigadier General Pendleton was the Confederate artillery chief, had less control, and he might have been incompetent. Stephen Sears, in his book Gettysburg, blames General Pendleton for mismanaging the Confederate ammunition supply and not informing General Lee of the mismatch between what was needed for the battle and what was actually on hand. Union advantage number 2. The Union Army outnumbered the Confederates. Philip Lano, in his book Gettysburg Campaign Atlas, has the numbers this way: 93,921 versus 71,699, and that's a 31% advantage. Finally, Union advantage number 1. The Union troops occupied a strong position, high ground, dug in with interior lines. Let's look at the map. There are 3 pieces to the position advantage that the Union had. First, the Union troops were on high ground. Confederate troops tried several times to attack Culp's Hill from the east, high ground. They tried several times to attack Cemetery Hill from the north, high ground. On the second day, they tried to attack Little Round Top, high ground. And they tried to attack the Union center on Cemetery Ridge on the second and third days, high ground with open fields in the front. Second, these positions on high ground were also often fortified. The fortifications were either deliberately built by the Federal troops or the Union was using stone walls that were built by local farmers. Culp's Hill was extensively fortified under the direction of General Greene, who was an accomplished civil engineer in his career before the war. Confederate Major General Rhodes, a brigade commander in Ewell's Corps, took a look at Culp's Hill during the battle and is quoted as saying, "The hill in front of this position was, in my opinion, so strong that it could not have been carried by any force," unquote. The Union position on Cemetery Hill had stone walls. According to Harry Fans in his book, Gettysburg, Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, Union troops on Cemetery Hill fought from behind stone walls as the Confederate troops charged uphill against them. The Union position at Little Round Top had quickly built breastworks. Fans referred to breastworks of wood and stone, and Edmund Coddington included a photo of breastworks on Little Round Top in his book, The Gettysburg Campaign. The Union position at the angle on Cemetery Ridge, attacked in Pickett's charge, had pre-existing stone walls. Third, the Union position had interior lines. On the map, notice how short the distance is from the Union left to the Union right versus from the Confederate left to right. Interior lines mean that you have shorter and safer paths for reinforcement, supply, passing messages, and for retreat if needed. The interior lines were especially useful on the second day when the Union position on the left was near collapse. General Meade was able to quickly bring reinforcements forward from the rear area on Baltimore Pike, from the center on Cemetery Ridge, and from Culp's Hill. Interior lines were also used on the third day when the Third Corps was moved north and Robinson's division moved forward from Cemetery Hill during Pickett's charge. My opinion is there was no way the Confederates were going to win the Battle of Gettysburg. Fighting in enemy territory, outnumbered, with bickering commanders, facing an enemy dug in on higher ground, there was no way they were going to win against those odds. Buford and Reynolds gave General Meade a winning hand, and then General Meade made no mistakes. Meade and the Army of the Potomac won the Battle of Gettysburg. It wasn't about Lee or anyone else on the Confederate side making mistakes. They could have fought a perfect battle. It wouldn't have made any difference. You can't win against those odds.